beautiful East Tennessee in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. You're listening to the Sherry Voluntary Show, and I certainly do appreciate you spending your time with me. Today's guest is, I think it's going to be something you guys have really like. It's Mr. Branon
There you go.
McCain. No, I go with Brian. Mr. Branon McCain, and he has started a GoFundMe. It is GoFundMe, correct, that you're going
Yes.
through, and it's called Homeless in Nashville. And how I found out about this, I was just online, like going around, and I saw what you were doing, and I watched your video, and I was really impressed with you, Brannon, and just impressed that the initiative you had taken, and some of your history and why this is important to you. So we will get into that a little later. But why don't you first tell us a little bit about what you're doing with this homeless in Nashville campaign?
Okay. Well, first of all, to make you feel a little bit better about messing up my name, so it's Brandon. It's my middle name, and what I tell everybody is, yes, you heard that incorrectly. It's actually Brandon with no D,
Right,
rhymes with Shannon, if that helps. It's also my middle name, first name Eric
right.
with a K, of course. So anyway, you everybody messes it up at least once. So there
I
you
don't
go.
feel so
Now
bad.
that, now that that's out of the way. So Homeless in Nashville was a GoFundMe that I started few weeks ago, and what prompted me to do it was a church group that I'm in. It's a men's small group called David's Men, and it's a very intensive group. And each month we're given a different assignment. So this month's assignment was GoFundMe. I'm sorry, it was acts of kindness. So I was thinking, what could I do? Some of the suggestions that I was given was pay for somebody's meal, donate to a foundation that you like, give more money to the church. Of course, that one's on there. But so I was thinking, and I'm thinking about my bank account, and I'm thinking about all these things. So I decided to start a GoFundMe and have other people finance my act of kindness. But that's actually just a little joke that I tell. I have donated to it, and but if you look at it, what it is that I'm putting together, and I'm looking at all the items right now. We put together these care packages and pass them out to homeless people. And, it's a really nice little string sports bag. And I'll show you some of the items and some of those things here in a little
Great.
bit. Um, Basically, of all of the things in the world that touch my heart, I think homelessness is really at the top of the list.
Mm.
I have personally experienced homelessness, and we can get into that here in a little bit. I know people in that community. I have family members, or let me be more specific, a family member who experienced homelessness is very close to me. I also am very close to the community, the addiction community, drug addiction, alcoholism. And so that combined, what I decided to do was just start this thing. And I didn't think anybody would really donate to it, but, I started making these videos, writing these posts, and, because my first concern was that people who knew me from my past would think, what is he up to? Is this some kind of weird scam he's trying to pull? Because that is in my history, just homelessness, addiction is what got
Sure.
me there. But no, it was legit. So I made the videos, and there it came. The first week we got $60. So me and my wife went to the store, decided to do 10 bags, got all the items that we could get with that amount of money. That turned out to be really, a good amount of stuff. And that was it. And since then, we have gotten quite a few more donations, and the bags have gotten better and more numerous. So quality and quantity has increased.
Yeah,
But
that's great. I admire what you're doing because so many people sit back and say, "Wow, ain't that a damn shame?" and then just keep going. I'm guilty of that myself, but I think, this is what we're about, building communities and helping people in our communities, and that if we want to see a voluntary society, a more libertarian society, then we have to get involved. Because if you're not going to rely on the government to do these things, then we have to get involved with them. And so I really do admire that initiative to say, well, what can I do? What can I do to help people? And how can I make this thing better and not wait on the government to do it or wait on someone else to do it? And there's nothing wrong with getting involved with other organizations and things too that help. But I think too often it's easy for us. I think we're all conditioned to sit back and wait for the government. And
Absolutely.
so it's nice to see people taking that initiative to do something and figuring it out because it takes work. It takes doing a little something. It takes feeling uncomfortable, which, sometimes people don't want to do. Because you go out there and you talk to people who, are really down on their luck, and it can be really uncomfortable, and maybe you don't know what to do or say. And so I really do admire that. I think that's, and I came from a background where I was homeless several times as a child, which is a little different, but I understand what it's like to be on that other side where, when you're living in a tent and, you even as a kid, you look at the world and go, well, why don't I have a place? Why don't I have a place like that? So,
I can't really imagine what that's like, honestly, as a child. Growing up, my upbringing was, I mean, you could say that I came from a rough background, but um, there is far worse out there. So, yeah, and just of all the people that are homeless in Nashville, it's almost, I think it's around 20% are children.
wow.
Number is increasing. Just to throw a few stats out, what you'll see is there's an estimate of people on, like actually on the streets at about 2,500 people, but there are estimates that it could be upwards to 20,000
Right.
people
When you're,
just in Nashville.
then that includes like people who are staying with friends or
Right.
hotels.
Or maybe, I'm not sure if the tent cities, I'm not really sure which way those go. I imagine that would be more like in the street.
Yeah, definitely.
That's what I would imagine. And, luckily there are a lot of resources out there, but they are, for the most part, specific towards women and children.
Right.
So, and which is great. But when all the resources are up,
Yeah.
okay, so there's really not a lot of people given to, the men. And of course, women without children are
Sure.
getting left out just because the resources aren't there.
Right.
In fact, yesterday, I started a new job, which is kind
Wow.
of this new life change that I'm taking on. I wanted to learn a skill. I've been in the hospitality industry my whole life, working in restaurants, driving for Uber, things of that nature, and I love it. But I always had this thought in the back of my head, like if the economy crashes, what good am I? And I don't know if I have that many skills to translate it into any kind of wealth. So I decided to join a plumber's apprenticeship program,
Cool.
that's one thing. But I was at work yesterday and I just mentioned that I volunteer with the homeless. And just like you said a few minutes ago, one of the guys was like, I don't feel sorry for none of them. Da, da, da,
Right.
da, da, da. And I heard him out and I heard his case.
Yeah.
And, and part of me agrees with it. Like, I actually understand where he's coming from. Like, from afar, you do kind of see a certain thing, and then you hear a certain thing, and of course there's bad experiences. But what my experience is that a lot of these people are disabled, mentally ill is
Hmm.
huge, and with a lot of the new science and addiction, what we're finding out is that when they say addiction isn't a choice, I think that scientifically that's the truth.
Hmm.
I mean, not to be confused with, do I choose to pick up for the first time?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not against that at all. But there is a small percentage of people that have that gene that they will do something and their brain will just, equivalate using drugs the same way your brain equivalates eating and food
Yeah.
and
I,
drink and water. I mean, it's the exact same drive that pulls people towards it. So once you start, it is very hard to stop.
And I think that mindset that you were mentioning of your coworker is really it's sad because I think a lot of people have that mindset and they don't think about what actually gets people there. Like people who come from happy homes and people who are, happy in life don't generally find themselves in those situations.
Right.
Drugs are something that people look to as generally as something to help with pain or either emotional or physical pain. There are reasons that people turn to crutches, even food, anything else. Like there are many addictions, and some are just more acceptable than others. I have my coffee. I have coffee right now, coffee all day long. That's an acceptable. It is an addiction, though. Smoking, those things are acceptable, and so. I remember talking with a nurse. I used to get allergy shots, and the nurse that gave them to me one day, we were talking about something, and she said, I just feel like it's not our job to judge people. It's just my job, because she was a Christian woman. She said, God just tells me to help people, and he'll worry about the other stuff.
So
It's not my job to judge them from how they got
that's
there.
interesting that you make that point because the guy that I was talking to, I was able to educate him a little bit on some of these things, and you could see his mind struggling with that, like, oh, well, if that's the case,
Right.
You could see the cognitive dissonance also flow in a little bit, and he's like, well, and that was how the conversation kind of ended. I was like, well, look, this is what God has put on my heart.
Mm-hmm.
When I see somebody on the street, and if I give them something, or say, for instance, if I give them $1, I don't care what they spend that dollar on. That's not up to me. I have no moral dilemma with what they use the money for. It's between me and God what I do, and then it's between them and whatever they're into
Right.
is between them and that. So I think that's a great mindset to have. Is I'm doing this. I am doing this for the homeless, but then there's also a spiritual aspect that I'm doing it for myself as well.
Mm.
And I'm not, I mean, I'm a kind person, I'm a generous person, but I'm also a little bit selfish too. Like I got kids and a family, and I have
Right.
things that I need to do. So this is helping me get out of my comfort zone for the
Sure.
most part, my most comforted zones,
Right.
and reach out and help people, because anytime that I do work with others and help others and volunteer my time for others, honestly, that's when I feel the best.
Sure. Yeah, and
That's what
I think
best.
there's two good points there. One is that I'm not an altruist because I don't believe that I'm obligated to give to people
Sure.
from a whatever your faith may say that that's the best thing to do, but I don't think you're obligated to do that. The reason I do it is because I want to have a good community and I want to help people, and I understand like your coworker there is missing that element of people make bad decisions sometimes, but they don't necessarily deserve what they get. Like
Yeah.
so you pick up the crack pipe once as a young person, not knowing that it's going to drive you into addiction or prostitution or things that you might not have ever seen yourself doing. Like those are huge consequences. The person doesn't necessarily deserve what they get. Like
Yeah,
it's
I'm with.
it's a trap, it's a trap. And so I think we just have to be, as compassionate as we can and help where we can. And like you said, this is something on your heart. It's close to your, life and what your experience has been. And so that's where you wanted to help. And there are plenty of places in our society that need help. So, it's just a good encouragement, good example for other people to find a place where they can help. And I
Right.
remember we interviewed, I can't think of his name now. It just escaped me, but it was called We Do Better, Dan Johnson, on the radio show he has a charity called We Do Better. And what they do is they look for places where they can come in as a charity and replace government
Wow.
in where it's helping. And it's a really, really great thing. And
Sign me up.
yeah, it's awesome. And, there's a lot of great places in our communities. And in Knoxville here, we have something called Knox Area Rescue Ministries, CARM. They do a thrift store, and they have all these programs that they do to help people, who are addicted, get off of their whatever their addiction is, and move from that transition space to either homeless or close to it. Their life isn't going in the right direction, to that transitory place where they need that assistance to get employment, to get where they need to go. And I think churches don't get enough of a recognition for that work that they do in the communities, because I know there's a lot to criticize sometimes about religion, not just Christianity, but religion in general, and the religious mindset, the civil religion and authoritarianism that has been mixed with Christianity in our country. But oftentimes, people in churches are the most giving people. They're willing to go and do things that no one else will do, and they're willing to minister to people who no one else will minister to. And when I say minister, I mean it in the most simplest sense of the word, of helping someone that needs your help. And so, I think that's very commendable. I have friends. A friend, Cody Booker, a couple years ago when the hurricane hit Florida, and my other friend, Julia, who's down there right now, they've been helping. And one of the things they both said is the churches are there and they're ready to go, and they're helping people on the ground, and people aren't waiting for the government, because if you're waiting for FEMA, you might wait a long time.
That is, yes, you are correct.
So I think that's great. And I commend you for, I know you're coming from a faith point of view with this, but that,
I would like to give a shout out to my church. So Godwhy is the church that I go to. It's one word, Godwhy, and it's, like one word compacted together. And it was a church created for those people kind of on the fence about whether I should believe or not. I have all these questions. That's really the basis of it. And so they are very attractive as a church for those types of people, because there is no judgment. There's a huge recovery community within the church, people that have been drugs, alcohol, sex addiction, gamble, there is that pocket of people. And then, of course, there are the church people. They've been around for about 17 years or so. So some of the people that have been there the longest, it's very family oriented. Yeah. Our kids love it. And they have a huge community outreach programs. They help clean up halfway houses. There's a woman that owns a bunch of halfway houses that goes to church there, and we go over there, help that community, mission trips around the country, around the world. So it's a different, when most people think of church, I guess it's whatever the traditional church where you grew up. With me, it was Southern Baptist on one side of the family, Pentecostal on the other, and I had a bunch of friends who were Catholic. Right. So when I thought of church, that's what I thought of. And I'm just different, I guess, in a way where, and I think it's the same with church and government and anything that creates an avenue towards power. Right. Human nature for a lot of people, it's almost like it just goes towards corruption for a lot of people. And those avenues are the easiest ones to manipulate. Government and religion, I think, are probably the top two easiest ones. And, for a perfect example, the Vatican. The more you look into it, the weirder it gets. And it is like the ultimate mesh of government and religion. And nothing against Catholics in general. Like I said, a lot of my friends, they don't have anything to do with those types of decisions. Right. But it is amazing to me how even though you may find all these disagreements with the church, people might, that they're still inclined to go along with it. And so I think that this church has been just a huge blessing in my life and a lot of people's lives. So great. It's a long-winded shout out. That was a long way to get around to that. But yes, that's how I feel about that.
Yeah, I think there are things that in our lives that help. Everybody needs community. Everybody needs purpose in their life. And I think, for a lot of people, even if they're not particularly, I hate to say the word religious because religion has kind of a negative connotation to me, but even if they're not particularly believers, even just being involved in a church gives them purpose a lot of times. It gives you a community to be involved with. While you were talking, I was looking this up. Edmund Burke, he has a great thing he came up with called Little Platoons in their family, church, and local community that orient men toward virtues such as temperance and fortitude. And that can be anything. Like there are plenty of organizations out there, fraternal organizations and other organizations where people can create community around that and really give of themselves. And I mean, I think you can ask anyone who's ever been involved in, like not that I want people to join up, but the military for say, where people go and they do these hard things together and that really bonds you, and any kind of service, which I'm not saying the military is service because I don't agree with that, but it's not service to our country anyways, it's service to the political elite, but that's another topic. Right. But, if you're serving together or doing something together, these feats, they really do bond people and they really make for community. And I think about the community versus networks, where, there are a lot of networks is what we have in society today without real community, that deep, I'm trying to think, man, my brain is failing me today, but it was the man who was the New York City Teacher of the Year, and he has some great books out there. And one of the things that he had said was that that a community knows the name of its bums. So when you think about that, like a community, they know the name of, you think of like Andy Griffith's show or whatever, where they knew Otis. Everybody knew who Otis was. Everybody knew that he was the town drunk or whatever, and they dealt with it. And that's, I really would love to see more communities, because I think not enough of us really know what a real genuine community is like and how much comfort that gives people. So I know churches get a lot of criticism, and a lot of it is due many times, or I should say religious people. There's some criticisms to be made there a lot of times, but also I think that there are many more people out there who are just building community, and it's something to build around and to be able to help in their communities and do more and get outside of their own little box and see, what's going on in their world. So I think that's a great thing. And the other thing I think is that, people who find themselves homeless, like you had mentioned before, many of them are broken people. Like sure. they're people who have had mental illness or addiction, like you said, or many, many veterans who are homeless because they've come back broken from these wars that they love to send them off to. They want to give them big parades to send them off to war, but they don't do very much for them when they come back broken people.
No, they don't, and I can attest to that personally. I'm ex-military. I was in the Army infantry, which is kind of where the story doesn't necessarily start, but that's where the alcoholism and the addiction really accelerated for me. Prior to that, I think that I was a lot like most kids that dabble. I was curious about this and that, mostly marijuana. I wasn't really into anything heavier than that. However, when I went to the military, I suffered an injury. Yeah. And it started off with oxycodone. That's how it started. And the next thing you knew, as things accelerated, I began to take Oxycontin. That's what I was prescribed. And when I left the military, they were not very good about keeping me, within their scope. And so what ended up happening was, and this is the case for a lot of people, where the doctors are the drug dealers originally, or in my case, the government was provided the doctor who provided, that is such a common story. And then it accelerated from there to heroin because I couldn't. Well, here's the thing is that heroin's actually cheap. And the pills are not as cheap. When you look at comparative to, this feeling And this, it's $80 or $20, so normally you're going to go with the $20, just out of convenience. And over time, I wasn't able to live a stable life. And here's something else that this is probably be a good time to mix this in. My dad was an alcoholic, drug addict. He's still alive today, doing much better than he was, and I'll get to that in a second. But growing up, he was in and out of prison, in and out of drug rehab. So it was almost like the perfect storm. Everything was there waiting for me when I tried that. I had the gene of addiction in me. So I had the traumatic childhood, and all these things mixed
Right.
together. A lot of instability. And when it took off, it really took off. And when he got out of prison the second time in my life, I had just gotten out of the military. We decided to have our first real conversation. I think I just turned 20 years old. So he and I got together and discovered that we had the same drug and that we were into the same thing. And that's what we did.
Mm.
So me and my dad, unlike traditional father-son duos that may bond through throwing the old pigskin around or maybe going fishing or hunting, we decided to use drugs together, and that's how we bonded. And that is unfortunately not super uncommon. I know it sounds kind of crazy from
Right.
that outside looking in, but anybody that is on the inside of this, they're probably nodding their head right now, like, "Yep, seen
Yeah.
that before." And we went through that for a couple years together. We lived in a car that I had.
Well,
Uh, we would jump around from different people's houses. I slept outside on a couple of occasions just because, I mean, well, it was a nice night and I didn't like the smell of the house that we
right.
had come across. So it took a little while, but eventually I did get into a treatment center, a faith-based treatment center, which I'm totally for it. However, from my experience, because just to be honest, it wasn't enough. There was addiction isn't simply, okay, you go to treatment for a little bit, you come out and you're a different person.
Right.
Those obsessions and those inclinations, the compulsions, sometimes those don't go away as quickly as you would like them to. In fact, with opiates, the average opiate abuser, it takes about 24 months for the wires in their brain to go back to the way it was before they were using.
Right.
And there's a whole science behind it. I can send you some links to some really in-depth conversations and studies about it. But I also went to 12-step treatment. So that's like your typical NA, AA type program. And that was really good too. But what I found is that there's a lot going on here.
Right.
I combine the two. And what I've also found is that having a purpose is a huge factor. Having accountability is
Yeah.
a huge factor in me having years away from a drug that I honestly thought I would die doing.
Right.
I thought it would kill me. And there were some times where I was okay with that.
Right.
And that's how I know that there's people on the streets today who have those thoughts as well.
Right.
And when I think about what I'm doing, I know that I'm not solving the homeless problem, but what I believe is happening is that when they receive this bag, and they start to go through it, because I've seen it, I've watched it happen already. We've done this successfully for 2 weeks now, and almost every bag that I hand out, the smile on their face, you can almost see like a little bit of hope coming back in them. And you have to excuse me for a second. It's like it's something else, and I know that there, at least for a little bit, that person finds hope, and that's what it takes. That's what it took for me, was that in my darkest hour, something happened, and I found just enough hope to take the next step.
Right. And I think there's several things there you mentioned. One is that just when people are homeless, they're generally disconnected from their family and their communities and the people who care about them. And I mean, I've had other family members who have been homeless as well. And we didn't know where they were. We knew like they were in Atlanta somewhere. But where, we had no idea.
Yeah,
And
it's scary.
yeah, if
Yeah,
they didn't get in touch with us, we had no way to get in touch with them. So there's this disconnect, and it's easy for people to start thinking, well, they just don't care about me. And that's
yep.
not the case. It's just, how do you find somebody? And especially people who don't want to be found, that,
That's
you know,
that
really,
too. Yeah,
yeah, people are broken when they're in these situations. It feels hopeless, and there's that, like, that disconnect. And so to know that somebody cares about them, just that little bit can really make a huge difference in, maybe they decide to get help. I mean, I don't know what will happen from those things, but
right.
all I know is that when you can try and do some good, that may give them just what they need, the motivation, the inspiration, whatever, to make it work this time. Because, like you said, it's not always oh, I'm going to fix it, and today and tomorrow I get fixed. And
Yeah, in fact, I don't think that's how it works at all.
yeah, and so with you mentioned the genetics of it. I remember hearing, it was a study on aging once, but in genetics, and it said 75% of how you age is what you do, not your genetics. Your genetics only accounts for 25% of how you age. But I think that goes into addiction as well, is that you may be genetically predisposed to something, but it takes other factors within your life, like having a father in and out of prison, and other, things going not so great, that make that appealing. And I think, we've done this show. We recorded the other day, and I unfortunately lost that show, but we did talk about the study with the mice.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
yeah, you want to tell us a little bit about that? I think that's fascinating.
Okay, so there was an experiment done back in the 70s, I think. I'm not really sure when it was, to be honest, but what they did was that they took a mouse and they put two water bottles in the cage, one of them with water, and the other one had water laced with cocaine. And what they found is that when the rat got the cocaine water, it would continuously give itself that until it died. It wouldn't eat, it wouldn't sleep, it would do nothing but drink that. So because of that experiment, for many, many years, decades even, scientists believed that that's how addiction worked. Is that they would just, because addicts don't care about anything else but getting the next hit. That was the assumption.
Right.
And yeah, that's definitely part of it. But then years later, somebody else came along and did an experiment where they had that part set up with the water and the cocaine laced water, but they also had rat paradise going on.
Right.
All the food, toys, mates, everything a rat could want, put this cage. And what they found was that in almost every case, the rat would choose rat paradise over
Yeah,
going killing itself with drugs.
exactly.
So what we're seeing now is that purpose and accountability is such a huge
Yeah.
factor. And they're even doing these programs in other countries, like heroin clinics.
Right.
I know here we have, the methadone clinic and the Suboxone clinic, but here's the difference between what I've seen in some of those clinics, and it's not, the drugs are relevant. What's important and what I'm not seeing here in America is that there's no follow up.
Mm.
This is how government approaches many problems. And we talked about this the other day. It's the old proverb: "Give a man a fish, you feed him for a day; teach a man to fish, you feed him for life." And I think what the core meaning of that is that when you just give somebody, if you're putting a band-aid on the
Right.
problem, I think that's what a lot of these clinics do. But what some of the charities do, what some of these other clinics are doing, is twofold. First, they're going in depth with the person to find out what is the root cause of, what is the spiritual, mental, they're trying to get to the bottom of that. But they're also putting them in work programs. They're giving them jobs, they're giving them a place to live, or at least access to housing to some degree, be it,
Sure.
your own place, you got a roommate, or it's a commune-esque type place where there's
Sure.
multiple people. And I'm seeing more and more of that. now, because the drug epidemic is so bad, and especially in Tennessee, we have a huge opiate
Yeah.
crisis going
And
on.
a lot of that is from the government in the first place. And that's, you mentioned before
Yeah, absolutely.
that heroin's cheaper than the medicine, the pills that you get from the doctor. And
Right.
that is all because of prohibitions. That's all because they've made it that way. Like the black market makes it
It's a
that way. It makes
crazy
the,
conundrum, isn't it?
yeah, it
Like,
makes the drugs harder and it makes them cheaper. And so I think, that's something that I think a lot more people are waking up to, the problems with the drug war. And I think libertarians have been sort of seminal in that happening, because I don't know of a lot of other people who have been talking about the drug war and how bad it is. And even when I talk to, in here in uber conservative East Tennessee, you
sure.
talk to people about it and they go, yeah, I'm starting to see that maybe this isn't the best way to go.
What's happening is the problem is moving away from the poor, less educated neighborhoods, and
Right.
and here for a while now, it has leaked into the suburban areas, and
White kids in the suburbs doing heroin. And so now it matters.
in fact, when I first started, my best friend, he was doing it. Got out of the military, hooked up with back with just my best friend. We went to school together. Uh, I would consider him kind of a pretty boy, kind of a rich kid, pretty boy. Uh, and yeah, he was shooting heroin. So and then that became some of our friends, and then the next thing you know, people start dying.
Hmm.
And now, and this is before the fentanyl was even a thing. This was just whatever was. But now we have the fentanyl. And tell you a quick story. So me and my wife, one of our little hobbies is listening to the fire and rescue scanner for Metro, and so many overdoses.
Yeah.
It's crazy, especially on the weekends. Last 4th of July, we counted 11 overdoses
Mm.
before we quit listening. And this was just in a few hours.
Yeah.
So,
I think the government has contributed in another way. The state has, that I don't think a lot of people know about, is that many years ago, they made it so that if a doctor is prescribing you something, they can only prescribe you a certain amount of whatever and for so long. And so that's what happens, is many people, they're not getting the pain relief or what they need from the doctor. It's a matter of they're not getting enough of that to help them maintain. And people think that that's backwards, but it's that they have to go to street drugs to get that pain relief, because they're not able to get enough. Because what happened was the state started requiring more documentation, more paperwork. It like quadrupled the paperwork load for doctors. And so doctors just started saying, look, I'm not going to give people this much because I don't have time. And they don't. They're they've got enough going on trying to keep up with the regular stuff they have to do. So I think that's another contribution that is often overlooked, is that side of it, the bureaucratic side. And so there are just so many factors that go into this, that it is the perfect storm. And the drug war has made drug abuse a much worse problem than it ever would have been. I saw a statistic out of Great Britain a few years ago, and it was something like only 7% of people who use cocaine get addicted. Most of the people who use it do it recreationally. They do it on the weekends when they're going out. Like, and it was like kids in their 20s, or people in their 20s, young people. So,
right.
It's there's been a lot of scare tactic used, especially in this country, the DARE programs, all those things that have
Oh
used
yeah,
scare tactics that,
I have my DARE certificate. I
right?
mean, I do, just kind of as like a little joke between me and whoever's looking, but
Yeah. There's
yeah,
been some studies that show that those DARE programs, and not just to pick on DARE, any of those programs where they come into these schools and they do all this stuff, actually encourage the kids to do the drugs rather than their intent, which is to drive them away from it. But
well, the main factors in kids picking up is curiosity and peer pressure.
yeah.
Kids are curious. That's the way I started. I was curious.
And then
And
it
I
fills a void.
yeah, I just wanted to fit in.
Yeah.
That was one of the biggest problems I had. And so, my own personal experience and what a lot of my focus is on, as far as like how to fix the problem, I I think the only way that we're going to make any progress is if parents start parenting a little bit better. Um, and I know I can't write the perfect parenting book, I really can't. But what I know has made a difference in my life and my kids' life and so on is spending time with them, educating them. I was never educated on drugs and any of that stuff. I didn't know what they were until they found me. Yet in the other room for my entire life, my dad was over there getting high and drunk,
Right.
and like ruining everything. Like you would think maybe they would tell me, but
Yeah.
they were uneducated. So I think we're in a better place now to where our generations are a little bit more educated. My son and they're going to be more educated. My sister she has her master's in psychology, and she specializes in addiction and traumas and things like that. So um, once we start fixing that problem, I think things will change a little bit more, because that's where it starts. It starts with a kid coming from a broken home, getting in with the wrong crowd, trying something out, and then finding that these drugs can really take you to some places,
Right.
and it's jails,
Problems don't
institutions.
exist.
That's what you'll hear, and
Yeah.
then of course homelessness, and
Yeah.
so that's a big part of it is
And
focusing on education.
yeah, and I think those family connect, and we really talked about like the connection to community, and families are your first communities. They're the first place where we learn where our value is and where we fit in and what our purpose is. And I always tell my kids, like, you belong here. I don't care where you go in this world, you belong with us. You are one of us, and you're never too far away. You're never, like, we can always do something to help you if you need it. And it's not a coddle in a coddling sense, but in a, we are the same people. We're kin, as we would say down here in the South. We're kin, and I'm here for you. You're my children, and I'm your parent, and we should care for each other. If we don't care for each other, I'm not responsible for other people, but I am responsible for you, and you're responsible for me too. Families, there is a certain kind of, I don't want to say, maybe responsibility is not the right word. I don't know, but there's a connection there that you want to foster and develop and let your kids know. And I think the more they know and the more they feel connected, the less likely they are to get involved in some of these things. And I know that that's not always the case, but I think about like kids that get involved with gangs. They get involved with gangs oftentimes because that's a place where they can feel special and have purpose and be loved, even if it's not real love, that maybe they're not getting at home, because either, they might have drug addicted parents, or maybe the parents are just working so much that they're not as, able to be as connected. So I think there's so many factors that play into the solutions to the problems, but
Right.
we
Well,
can
it
only
goes
do what we can do.
handouts too.
Yeah,
It goes to
absolutely.
the communities the fatherless homes, and in so many instances, the mother is married to the state. There's no
Yeah,
incentive for them to be married and to have that stability. And I know that that view of how families should work, I guess, or what is like the most productive way to raise children. And I think that is in loving, stable households. And I think even that is being attacked heavily by certain political factors and things like that, because, if you're getting government handouts, that's generational.
right.
And
It's
like when you
very
brought up the
difficult to get off.
kids, that's almost across the board. And all the people that I've met in this, addiction wise and rehabs and things like that, it yes, you do meet some people that come from great homes and they had everything they wanted and their parents were great and they taught them all this stuff, and still,
Yeah. That's the
but
exception, not
it's
the
more
rule, though.
rare.
Yeah.
It's just more
Yeah.
rare. What you find is broken homes
And I always
everywhere.
tell people, I don't care what your family looks like, right? I really don't care what it looks like. I just care that you love each other and you really care for each other and you're connected. Like, your kids need that. Your family members need that from you. They need time. They need your attention. We sometimes people take better care of their animals, their pets, than they do their own families. And And, it's sad. And because, we see our pets as helpless and they depend on us, but
Yeah.
we forget that our human relatives really depend on us as well. And that we all need each other. We're social creatures, right? And we need a social atmosphere to grow in, a loving one. And so I think those are all great, points to be made, that there's so many moving parts to what could help this issue, but that is a big one, I think, is
Yeah.
homes of people who aren't just doing your best to give your kids everything. Is I hear people say that a lot. I want to give my kids everything, but they don't give them their time and attention. And that
That's what I want those.
yeah, that's the only
That's
thing that they
kids.
need more than,
Yeah.
like food and clothing and shelter.
Mhm.
They need that more than they need, the next video game or whatever. And I'm not opposed to those things. It's just that
Sure.
we get our priorities, I think, kind of jostled around, and really what our kids need is our connection with them and talking to them. That's family dinner table time, that kind of thing. It's important. So we're getting down to we're a little over an hour here, so we better wrap this up. But I wanted to show show one of the bags that you have going and what you got in there real quick.
Yeah.
And
Okay. So I haven't got the bags made up this week, but I do have the items. So first, we are doing men's and women's bags. So in
Right.
each bag, we have some basic food items, granola bar, cookies, gotta have some candy, got a sucker, got some protein, got a Slim Jim. We put a razor in each bag. I already have the crackers. Did I show the crackers? Crackers. Hand sanitizer.
Sure.
We also have, now this is a woman's hat, so we do men's and women's hats. And also I try to find gloves that match. I don't know if you can see it with the computer, if it's like the coloration's right, but I try to match things up. I don't just throw random items in there. We make sure they're new, they have the tag on them. Okay, pair of socks.
Nice.
The women we also put, gotta have the pads, hair ties, and that was actually a suggestion from my sister.
Yeah.
So a good friend of mine donated a bunch of Bibles. Now, what I like about this Bible is that it's the New Testament, Psalms and Proverbs, but it also has the Constitution. It has the Bill of Rights, Constitution, Declaration of Independence. It's pretty cool, It's a really random gift, and so I throw one of those in there. Also, my favorite item is one of these little coffee
the
cups.
best mugs ever.
Seen those, yeah.
I've had much more expensive coffee mugs, but those Dollar Tree coffee mugs are the best ones.
They rock, man. I've had one for forever. And so what I do is I'll put in a single serve coffee, and here's an instant coffee,
Right.
So they can have a cup of coffee. And I also put a handwritten note.
Nice.
And the handwritten note is just the way that it reads: hello or greetings, friend. Just want you to know that somebody's out here thinking about you. That's the first thing. You got somebody praying for you. And on some of these, just to be honest, I think I'm using them as these mini therapy sessions. I'm I've been through hard times.
Very cathartic, yeah.
This I found, and that also goes with having the experience that I have. It makes it easier to connect with people in that realm. And so some of the men and women that I've met and had conversations with have, when I tell them my story, you can see them become more comfortable, physically.
And
I'm not just a rando handing a bag out like I'm one of you. I just took the next step, and I know that that's not always possible, but
And I think this is important for them to see you, that you were there, because I think most people would look at you and myself and go, they would never think we've been homeless. They wouldn't think that we've had this in our past, but I mean, you just never know where someone has come from and what they've overcome. So I think it's great for them to see where maybe they can go. Like, hey, that guy did it. Maybe I can do it too. And out of all those things, and they're great things you've got in there, and I think they're very useful and handy. But I think the handwritten note is probably the best thing because it's back that's human connection back to the world, and like
I make a point that I physically write the note, like
uh,
that is, it's a big deal. It's symbolic in a way that,
yeah.
just because you're out here and you are homeless and whatever, addicted or just hopeless or whatever you are, whatever you got going on, guess what? Like people, we're still part of this together. Like
Right.
we're still moving through life together, in one capacity or another. So yeah.
It's fantastic. And before we wrap it up, I want you to give the name again and how people can get involved in this with you.
Okay. So all you got to do is go to GoFundMe.com, I think, or Google GoFundMe's, go to the website, search homeless in Nashville. That's pretty much it. My name is Eric Branon McCain on Facebook. That's Eric with a K, Branon with no D. And you could message me there if there's any questions you have. I also have an email attached to the GoFundMe, and it is homeless in Nashville, GFM at gmail.com.
Great.
That's it. So if you want to give items, suggestions of what we should put in the bags, things like that, this isn't set in stone. These items are subject to change at any time.
Sure.
I'm not married to it. I just want to get some things out there to them. So if you want to donate items, or, it's not just about money. If you want to just write an encouraging note, that's fine too. And if you go to the GoFundMe, you'll find that I've put a lot of videos. I'm always putting updates. The only thing that I don't do is record me giving the bags out. And that's just for anonymity purposes. Maybe they
Sure.
don't consent to me having them on film or on camera. So one day I may have a recorded conversation with somebody who consents to it, and we may post that. But for now, it's just, pre and the post action. So
Great.
Yeah, so go check it out. Please donate if you can, but shares are just as important. And that's what we're doing.
And I think it's one of the most important things too, is to inspire other people to not only maybe get involved with what you're doing, but to where in my community do I see a need? Where can I help? Where in my, if it's just even within your own family, if it's, wow, I haven't been maybe spending enough time one-on-one with my kids as I should. Maybe that's where you start. I think you should always start. You have to give. So if you got stuff in your own house to clean up, you clean that up, and then you can give that pay that forward or whatever they say. And two, I think the big takeaway here is that we don't have to wait on government to do things. And especially as libertarians, we should, do our best to try not to wait on the government, because that's, if we want to get rid of some of these things because we want a more libertarian society, well, we have to step up. And yes, a lot of these ills will be taken care of when the state is taken care of, but there's always going to be those among us that need help. And so what are we willing to do to do that? I think it's something that we all have to consider, is if we want this kind of society, radical freedom is radical personal responsibility too. And so I think that's part of our responsibility, is making sure that our communities stay, nice, and we do things for each other when the time comes, when need arises. So I certainly do appreciate you being with me, Branon. I really appreciate you being so patient with me and redoing this show together because of my technical difficulties. So,
well, you know what? On the bright side, I got to talk to you twice. We've actually had to have two pretty solid conversations, in my opinion. So
great.
Definitely a blessing in disguise. And if you want to, anytime you want to have me on to chit chat about whatever.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much. I certainly appreciate it. And I know you've got a concert to go to, which is pretty exciting. That'll be a lot of fun. So
yeah. Your producer is probably a little bit jealous. But
maybe. Yeah. So, all right, guys. Well, that's it for me this week. And remember that you can check this out. You can give there, and don't wait on the state to do things for you. Get out there and do it. Peace.